$1 million isn't worth what it used to be. That's something that a lot of people in the finance community have been saying in recent years, and from a certain point of view, they're absolutely right. Due to things like inflation over time, any dollar amount isn't going to be worth what it once was. And according to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, $1 million in 1980 would be worth a little over $3 million today, simply due to that inflation effect. This may also be why some have said that $3 million is the new $1 million. But just because $1 million isn't worth what it was 40 years ago doesn't mean that it isn't still potentially a life-changing amount of wealth. And I believe that there's more to why $1 million just doesn't feel special anymore than the inflation effect. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Today we're going to be discussing what I think are the 4 biggest reasons behind why $1 million is just not feeling as special in the modern world, and what we can do to make that $1 million feel special again, or at least get the most out of the milestone when we reach it. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a link to my Patreon page. This is the best way to show your support for this channel, and in addition to that, you can also get early access to new videos and exclusive content such as spreadsheets based off the ideas we discuss in these videos. The spreadsheets will allow you to play with your own numbers and see how big of a difference some of the ideas we discuss can make for your own personal financial situation. So the first reason why $1 million just doesn't feel as special as it once did is the one we already discussed: inflation. As we just established, $1 million in 1980 had about the same amount of purchasing power as $3 million does here in 2020. On average, that means that inflation has eroded our buying power through the general increase in prices by about 3% per year during that stretch. However, inflation isn't a universal constant. Different places experience different levels of price increases at different times. The same can be said for individual products, services, and even people's lifestyles. Let's take a look at a few examples. For products, probably the most notable one to mention is computers. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh with a price tag of $2,495. If we adjusted that price for inflation from 1984 to 2020, it would cost almost $6,200 today. You can certainly build computers that cost over $6,000, but most don't come near that price point. Heck, most don't even cost $2,500. And that's despite the fact that each and every one of today's computers are considerably more powerful than the Mac was in 1984. According to data from the CPI, the average inflation for personal computers was around negative 13.6% per year since 1997, when they started tracking that category. Many other products also tend to rise in cost slightly slower than the overall inflation rate would suggest. For instance, clothing has risen in cost by about 0.7% per year since 1980. The price of new cars has increased by an average of 1.2% per year. Given that the average inflation rate during that time was around 3% per year, that's quite a noticeable difference. On the other side of the coin, we've got healthcare costs, which have risen quite a bit faster than the overall inflation figures would suggest. About 5% per year for medical costs since 1980, according to the CPI data. Similar things can be said for many other services, whether they're health-related or not. For instance, financial and legal service costs have risen by about 3.9% per year since 1986 and 1987, respectively. We all know what's happened to the cost of college over the years, so I won't even go into that. But heck, even something as seemingly mundane as laundry and dry cleaning services have outpaced the overall inflation rate, rising by about 2.6% per year on average since 2004, compared to the overall inflation rate of around 2% during that particular stretch of time. This isn't always the case, but it is a very noticeable trend that services have tended to rise in costs faster than products for the most part. So you can see how, depending on what costs make up the majority of someone's lifestyle, they could wind up with wildly different personal inflation rates over time. Someone depending more on the services of others may get less out of their $1 million nest egg than do-it-yourselfers or minimalists who rely more on know-how, willingness to learn, and products. Or in the case of the most minimalistic among us, may not rely on many products or services at all. Similar differences can be found in location data. For instance, from 1980 to 2020, we know that the US as a whole experienced average overall inflation levels of around 3% per year. However, not every area in the US experienced the same level of overall inflation. The San Francisco Bay Area had higher average levels of inflation than the US as a whole did, clocking in at around 3.4% per year during that 40-year stretch. Whereas Houston, Texas experienced lower average levels of inflation of around 2.6% per year. Now that may not sound like much, but over the course of 40 years, it can add up. Assuming you had $1 million stashed away somewhere in 1980, it would have had the same buying power as about $268,000 today if you were living in San Francisco. Whereas if you were living in Houston, that same $1 million nest egg would have the equivalent buying power of about $361,000 today, which is nearly a six-figure difference in buying power over the course of a working career based off of a less than 1% difference in average inflation levels between two metro areas within the same country. Similar and sometimes even more extreme differences can be found when comparing different countries with one another. As an example, take Australia and Canada. According to the Australian Bureau of Labour Statistics, the annual CPI has risen by an average of 3.8% per year since 1980. Whereas according to data from Statistics Canada, the CPI there has only risen by an average of 2.7% per year. But when you're comparing different countries, you may also have other things to consider beyond just the inflation rates indicated by the Consumer Price Index. You may also have to consider exchange rates between currencies. Take the US and Canada as an example. Back in January 2008, the US dollar and Canadian dollar were worth about the same on the exchange markets. However, by the end of 2008, one US dollar was exchangeable for roughly $1.20 to $1.25 Canadian. As of me writing this anyway, it's early August 2020, and the exchange rate is sitting around $1.33 Canadian per $1 US dollar. During that same 12-year span, Canada's inflation rate of 1.5% per year was slightly lower than the US inflation rate of about 1.6% per year. What this means is that someone using geo-arbitrage strategies and living on US dollar savings or income while in Canada has potentially experienced a double whammy dampening effect on their personal inflation rate. Because not only is every US dollar that they earn or withdraw from their savings to live on going further than it did back in 2008, but their costs haven't risen quite as quickly as they would have if they were still living back in the States. Although in this particular case, the price inflation part is really only a small part of this picture. The second reason why $1 million doesn't feel as special as it once did is the unfortunate combination of lifestyle creep, high burn rates, and the related debt loads that many of us now carry. Any dollar amount can be squandered if you try hard enough. Look no further than the countless athletes, lottery winners, and celebrities who have made millions only to end up penniless down the road for proof. However, as we just covered, not every lifestyle costs the same to maintain, and it can change quite substantially depending on a few factors, such as obviously where you live, but also how you prioritize and structure your spending, and whether or not your debt load is at a manageable level. We just spent quite a bit of time on the where you live portion of things, so I'll keep this section brief. One thing that I did want to add to what we just covered in the inflation section a minute ago is that the overall cost of living in the here and now can vary wildly from place to place, even if it's within the same country. This should come as no surprise to those of us here in the States. I mean, just look at real estate prices in New York City, San Francisco, or Seattle compared to places like Houston, Philadelphia, or Chicago. And you'll see quite a big difference, even though those aren't necessarily the absolute most affordable places to live in the country. Beyond real estate prices, there's often quite a difference in ongoing expenses as well. Just look at the cost of living data provided by sites like Numbeo.com to get an idea of how big of a difference there can be. According to the site's estimates, to maintain the same lifestyle you could have in New York for $100,000 a year, you would only need around $54,000 a year in Houston, assuming you rented in both cities as of this writing. You could take it a step further and compare it to places outside the US as well. For example, in Montreal, you'd only need about $45,000 to maintain that same lifestyle you had in New York for $100,000. In Chiang Mai, Thailand, you may be able to do it for less than $30,000 a year. Now, obviously, this is just using the high-level data. As we discussed, different lifestyles, even in the same location, can require wildly different incomes to maintain, particularly if you're experiencing a lot of lifestyle creep. So take those estimates with a grain of salt, but the point remains. Living in a high cost-of-living area can quickly make that $1 million nest egg, or whatever nest egg you have, seem less life-changing. Not to mention making it tougher to make ends meet, which causes issues in other areas as well. But beyond where you live, how you prioritize and structure your spending is also important. It's no secret that most minimalists and frugal people will get a lot more out of $1 million nest egg than an indebted super spender will. They won't fall victim to impulse purchases as much, and they generally don't experience as much lifestyle creep due to having those well-defined priorities decided in advance that allow them to better distinguish between needs and wants. And when they do buy something, they typically get a lot of use out of it. Many of them will also opt to pay cash for whatever they buy whenever possible. Structuring their spending as a one-time upfront payment instead of a series of ongoing bills, often with interest attached, can make the income generated off of that $1 million nest egg seem all the larger. It's one of the many perks of having that low burn rate. And that goes hand in hand with having a manageable, or even non-existent, debt load. Let's face it, if you're lugging around a $500 a month car payment, paying another $300 to $400 a month towards student loans, and possibly still working on a mortgage, that $3,300 or so a month that a $1 million nest egg can sustainably provide you with in income suddenly doesn't seem all that special. However, compare that to someone who's completely debt-free, and has maybe even taken advantage of some other strategies that we've discussed so far. Suddenly, that $40,000 a year in income can do a lot more. Another potentially interesting thing you might be able to do to curb lifestyle creep, beyond things like the values-based or zero-sum budgets, self-exploration, and experimentation that many frugal people have found success with, is to travel. After all, cultures are different all around the world, and not all are as materialistic as we can sometimes be here in the States. So experiencing those cultures may give you a newfound perspective on your previous life and enable you to make changes that you wouldn't have made otherwise once you return home. Thus, $1 million may still feel relatively rich to the well-optimized lifestyle, even if it still isn't what it used to be due to the effects of inflation. The third reason why $1 million just doesn't feel as special as it once did is how we're measuring our net worth. People measure net worth in different ways. Some include everything you own, from your house, your car, and your business to the stickers from some long-forgotten party in your closet. Others include major line items, such as your house and car, along with your investments, but maybe not much else. Still others only include things you can quickly turn into usable cash, which typically cuts out things like the house, the car, and the business, as well as most retirement accounts, as they may or may not be able to be converted to cash quickly and without penalty. So as you can imagine, a $1 million net worth can feel substantially different depending on how it's measured. Generally speaking, those with a liquid $1 million net worth will feel richer than those with a mere paper net worth of $1 million, especially if debt payments are still part of the equation. So what can we do about this? How can we use this to make $1 million feel more special again? Well, truth be told, this may actually be one cause of the gradual devaluation of millionaires that you just don't want to do anything about. I mean, diversification and lifestyle satisfaction are important pieces of a long-term wealth-building strategy. So while we could say that you could sell your home or sell your business and shift as much of those funds as we could to get into more liquid assets and make ourselves feel a little richer, there are often very, very legitimate reasons why we wouldn't want to do that. The same could be said for retirement investment accounts, as they provide benefits of their own. The fourth reason why $1 million doesn't feel as special as it once did is our own psychology. We humans are social creatures, and we do have a tendency to compare ourselves to others from time to time, for better or worse. And there have been studies done that have showcased our natural psychological biases when it comes to money in this way. We've covered a few of them on this channel in the past, but one that's particularly relevant to today's topic is our tendency to feel better about ourselves when we compare favorably to those around us, and worse when we don't. This tendency is known as relative deprivation, and it permeates a lot of our society today. This is basically the reason that keeping up with the Joneses is even a thing. Relative deprivation is the experience of being deprived of something to which we believe we are entitled. It explains the unhappiness we sometimes feel when we compare our positions, or in this case our level of income, wealth, or the various discretionary lifestyle-related expenses we may or may not have, to others and realize that they have more than we do. And considering that millionaires have become so much more statistically common over the years, I mean, there's over 18 million of them in the US alone, according to data from Credit Suisse's Global Wealth Report in 2019, it's no surprise that the milestone might feel less special than it did in the past. This relative deprivation effect can be intensified if we know other people who are also millionaires and either have a higher net worth than us or just accumulated their wealth faster than us, which, of course, the internet, reality TV, and other outlets have made finding those people oh so easy to do. And while in some cases that has been incredibly beneficial, I mean, without some of those outlets, financial education channels like this one probably wouldn't exist, it can also contribute to that devaluation of the modern millionaire. So what can we do about it? For one thing, we can use this psychological quirk to our advantage. We can consciously remind ourselves that even today, being a millionaire puts you in the top 1% of wealth holders worldwide, and that's quite something. Even here in the States, it's still far from a common achievement, even if it is becoming more common than it was in the past. A second thing we can do is to be more aware of what we're consuming when it comes to media. There's nothing inherently wrong with reality TV shows or any other piece of media that showcases the lifestyle of the rich and famous. Some find it quite inspirational, and that's awesome. But if it is making you feel bad about yourself or the progress you're making financially or otherwise, then for goodness sakes, change the channel. And a third thing we can do is invest more into our own education. Because the more we understand about our brains and ourselves and how we operate, the better we'll be able to recognize psychological phenomena like this one when they're happening. Sure, it may not always stop the effect from occurring, but at least we'll be able to recognize it for what it actually is and deal with it appropriately. So those were 4 reasons that I feel contribute to why having $1 million net worth just doesn't feel as special as it used to be, and some thoughts on how to make the most of it or whatever we do have now and going forward. What did you think? Are there any reasons you feel I missed? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.